Oh, she's a nice lady to warn us like that. Um, so this is Doug Miller in Montreal with the Canadian Anti-Apartheid Activist History Project with Jane and Ken, Jane Armstrong, Ken Lukart in Toronto from the SAC2 Solidarity Committee, and in Vancouver, Sid Shniad, who was an active
Schneid.
unionist and involved with the SAC2 Solidarity Committee out there. Pardon?
Schneid.
I beg your pardon? Oh, I'm sorry, Sid Shniad. Okay, thank you for that. So Sid, we're here on the 15th of June 2022, and we sent you a consent form which indicated that we're doing this for education purposes and allowing people to do research and reading about this and producing maybe even podcasts and so on. We hope you've read that and agree to the conditions.
Yes, I have.
Okay, good. That seems to be quite a delay then between my talking and the reaction. So we'll just try to be sensitive to the gaps. So yeah, that's it. Sid, could you just introduce yourself? Like, give us your full name, a little bit of background about yourself, and how you got involved. Probably first in unionism, and then with anti-apartheid work with SAC2.
My name is Sid Shniad. I'm a native of the US. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I was a red diaper baby. My folks were active in the Communist Party in the States, where it's from them that I learned I internalized my values and my political orientation. I'm not a member of the Communist Party, but the basic values that left-wing values they instilled in me. My mother was a stalwart union activist, rank and filer in New York City. At the same time, she had no illusions about unions because she always thought that union bosses were among the worst, which I learned to my displeasure on my own experience of working as a union staffer. But all these things sort of knit together to make me who I am and created my orientation toward the world. And putting it all together, I have no regrets about it whatsoever. I spent the 5 years from 1968, June of 68 till June of 73, teaching school in the Los Angeles ghetto at John Muir Junior High School in order to stay out of the Vietnam War. That was another searing educational experience for me. I saw the divide among the faculty, the young whites who were in the faculty. They either became flaming racists or real radicals, and there wasn't much in between. People, in terms of their reaction to the conditions in the schools there, they either blamed the kids or sympathized with the kids, and there wasn't much in between. I guess it was June of 73, the draft expired, and my wife and I moved to Bellingham, which is the town just south of the US border from Vancouver, where she went back to school to get a master's in school psychology. She got hired out of that master's program by the Surrey schools just north of the border as a school psychologist, and we emigrated in, I guess it was September 1974. And I then went back and got some background in economics because I'd been reading the history of the Russian Revolution, and I kept banging up into economics. I couldn't understand what was going on. And I enrolled first in the local community college to get the background in the basics of economics, which was a shocking experience. I'd been reading the Russian Revolution, and I don't know if you've had the experience of being exposed to neoclassical economics, but I got the Samuelson textbook, and I opened this thing and I'm thinking, this is going to explain the Russian Revolution to me. I mean, it was just mind-boggling. So I went into economics. I went enrolled at Simon Fraser. I ended up getting a master's degree in economics in 1977, and I had a couple of odds and ends jobs. But my desire was twofold in going into economics. I wanted to understand the world from a political economic point of view. And I also wanted to acquire some skills and talents that would be useful as somebody who might work for a union. I had a couple of odds and ends jobs in the ensuing couple of years. And then in 1980, I got hired by the Telecommunications Workers Union in Vancouver. And I thought I died and gone to heaven. This was a really militant organization. They had a history of flying squads, so that when they had a confrontation with the phone company, all kinds of allies to the phone company got picketed down and all this. It was an amazing and wonderful time. And when we came to BC, that was the high watermark, I think, of the militancy of the trade union movement. You had to stock up your beer every other summer because you could look on the calendar and know there was a beer strike coming, and the ferry workers were militant as hell. It was just unbelievable. It was a real sense of working class strength and pride and militancy. It was just fantastic. And in this context, what I brought to it was, and I guess in certain ways, naivete from the background I got from my parents. My understanding of trade unionism was that this was collective strength, but that you owed a reciprocity of solidarity to people that you wanted to work with. And I encountered some union bureaucrats at the Federation of Labor in BC or in Vancouver who, if you look at me, I was crazy. I suggested working with the retirees and the unemployed members. And the answer I get from one of these bureaucrats is, some of our members aren't interested in working with them. And I'm thinking, what kind of answer is that? Why should anybody extend solidarity to us if our view of it is one way? You help us. Thank you very much. We'll see you some other time. I mean, it's ridiculous. It was in this context that I don't remember the initial exposure to the SAC2 support committee. I don't know if Keith Lee introduced me to you, Ken, or I don't know how I made touch with. Do you have any memory of that?
Vaguely, I think it was through Jeff, actually, now that you mentioned that option. Yeah. And yeah, I'm just saying that even though Samuelson won't explain the Russian Revolution may explain Samuelson.
Thank you for that, comrade. Part of my MA program at Simon Fraser was taking Marxist economics with Mike Leibowitz, which had a profound impact on me because it filled in everything that I had been looking for when I first made the mistake of going into the economics program. So it all worked out in the end. But I did find the economics program, even the neoclassical stuff, very useful, because whenever I encountered any managers at the phone company, they were very rudimentary in their understanding of anything from a managerial point of view. So they'd start spouting something on a very simplistic level, and I could run rings around them with neoclassical economics. You don't know, it doesn't work that way. It works. So after a while, they started to avoid me because they weren't getting anywhere with me. But I had problems, back to the subject, I had problems within the union because there were rank and file would-be politicians who saw me as a threat that, that I might impede their careers, or I would be suggesting stuff to the union executive that was controversial or too radical for them. And that I had a lot of history with that. And I think you were mentioning this, Ken, in some earlier email exchanges on this. The TWU was much more militant than its counterpart in Ontario, Quebec, the Communication Workers of Canada. And if memory serves, we had a very different approach to the issue of South Africa between the two unions. The executive of the TWU was led, when I was first hired there, by a guy named Bill Clark, who was also the son of communists. And he was erratic and inconsistent in many ways, but when it came to something like apartheid, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist or any kind of phenomenal progressive to understand that this is the kind of thing you take a stand on if you call yourself any kind of progressive or trade unionist with any kind of social or socialist orientation. So if there was some dissatisfaction within the executive of our going off into a political direction, Bill Clark and his allies within the executive were able to handle that. And I think it was on that basis that TWU was came on side the whole issue of support for SAC2. I'm waiting to, it's a lag, so I'm waiting to hear, or maybe you're out altogether, Doug. I'm
I
not
see.
hearing
And
anything.
then where would Jeff Keighley fit in all this?
Okay, I was, before I got hired at the TWU, I don't know how I became, I got it. It's
Okay,
a
I guess
long
I'm not
lag,
being.
but I got you. I got to know Jeff Keithley and Jess Suckamore and John Bowman and a bunch of the people at KMA and the CCU even before I got hired at the TWU. And my real desire would have been to go to work for KMA, but there was a big lineup of young lefties who wanted to do that, and I was too far back in the line, so I had to settle for the TWU. What's that in the chat? Oh, please carry. Oh, I see. Okay. So I didn't have to explain or qualify anything with any of the people at KMA when it came to politics. I mean, we had full frank discussions the way we're having here now. I mean, it was just, whereas, as you well know, within the trade union office or environment, you have to be very careful about who you talk to and what you say to them, for fear that they will be ratting on you or trying to entrap you or something like that. But I mean, the CCU people and the KMA people were great, and that's how I knew Keithley.
Do you recall, Sid, whether you or others wrote articles in the TWU paper? I've forgotten what it was called.
The Transmitter.
The Transmitter, and about South Africa or apartheid, but also whether the issue came up at conventions, local union meetings, that kind of thing.
In terms of the Transmitter, I've had a bad experience. I saved all the stuff. I had a monthly column on political labor news and a couple of pages in the paper where I did clippings from the mainstream press, but I gave it a labor and left-wing sort of orientation. And from the feedback I got from rank and file members, they liked it a lot. Unlike most of the stuff that's in a union paper about so-and-so officer did this ribbon cutting and that kind of crap, which is boring and stultifying. I tried to put an edge into it to show people the relevance of even the stuff if you looked at it right from the daily paper, even from a crappy right-wing daily paper, that was very popular. And I wrote an op-ed piece to go along with that. I put it all on discs when I retired, and I have that, but the formatting of that was crap. It's my understanding that all that stuff is on file somewhere in the archives of UBC, but I've never gone out there to take a look at it. When I said originally in response to you, Doug, that I'm happy to be interviewed, but I don't think I did a lot, I don't have a great deal of memory of that. I mean, it might have been whatever activity I was involved in vis-a-vis South Africa and SAC2 would have been integral to my daily work. I didn't attend SAC2 Solidarity Committee meetings in the Lower Mainland, so that's one thing. When I was talking to them about not having been active, I wasn't active there. I think it likely that I just supported it on a daily basis as a gut response. Like if an issue came up, I promoted it. If there was a mailing from SAC2, I bring it to the executive and speak to it and things like that. But that's the preponderance of my involvement as I remember it.
Were you part of the Vancouver and District Labor Council?
I would go to some meetings, but not, I was an employee of the union, and they zealously guarded the role of politicians versus staff.
Yep, understand.
I mean, let me just jump in here and try to provide a little context to what I remember. Our first trip to BC was in 1980. That's when we met Keithley, Angus McPhee, John Jensen up in Terrace, et cetera, et cetera. And then you were just getting hired that year by TWU, you said. So it was when after we knew Keithley knew us, that you would have talked to Keithley about all these issues. But what I remember, we're all based here in Ontario at the time. BC was to us the radical part of the labor movement in Canada, and that we were right in thinking that.
Oh, the
So
good
when I
old
met-
days.
Yeah, when I met you, I can honestly say this on tape here, that I felt it wasn't having to go to meet Bill Clark every time I went to Vancouver. I'd meet with Sid Shniad, which is the same as meeting with Bill Clark. You know, different in unions like the CAW or UAW then. You know, you wanted to meet with Bob White every time you had a chance. But, we met with Gendon, but in this case, we met with you, Sid, and you would take on the initiative, whatever we were proposing, to your executive, to the membership through convention. I do remember speaking at a fairly large convention of TWU. I can see the hotel, but I can't remember which one it was. It was one of your major events.
On Robson Street?
Could have been.
Okay.
Very good response. And out of that, we got response from a number of your locals. Now, unlike some of the other unions, we didn't actually go, as far as I recall, to too many local union meetings to make our presentation, but we did get all the support we wanted from TWU, which was then, I'm going to say parallel with CWC. We had very good support from CWC and the rest of the country because we had some very good people like yourself supporting us. And so we wanted to make sure that the entire communication sector was part of the support for SACTU, which was the importance of the TWU then and the importance of having you on tape now.
I also remember you were coming to the shop steward courses that I was teaching to talk about South Africa.
That's right. I'd forgotten that.
And I remember getting red baited for having invited you.
What you do.
What do you, yeah.
Now, another question I would ask, try to find a question here. Because it was a very progressive union, I'm sure that it wasn't only South Africa that drew the attention, got the attention of the leadership and yourself. What other examples of international working class solidarity would you say TWU took on in those days?
I think there was a greater feeling of comfort in working against South Africa, apartheid in South Africa than there was. The other thing that was going on at that time was Central American support. And I think people were a lot more skittish because I think the red baiting on that was really fierce. I went on a union solidarity tour to Nicaragua, I guess in the mid 80s, 85, 84, 85. But I mean, things were uneven. When I came back, I was allowed to make a presentation on what was going on there to the convention, and I got a very good response to it. So, I mean, you never can tell on these things. Sometimes individuals would have it out for you and they want to derail it. And I think that this largely had to do with the kind of political campaigns that were being waged behind the scenes by the government, intelligence agencies and stuff like that. If they had a real bee in their bonnet about something going on, they didn't want support coming, then funny things would start happening. There'd be more difficulty than you anticipated. Other times, none. So I can't tell you what it was specifically. We weren't party to that, but that was my experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead, Doug. Too bad we haven't have Doug.
No sound at all. I had to practice my lip reading.
As you recall, we had major
I'm
battles.
leaving it to you guys because of this sound lag.
Okay.
As you recall, say we had major battles with the CLC because of their perception of SACTU and the association of SACTU with the ANC and the ANC's association with the South African Communist Party, etc. So I don't think it was a problem for the TWU leadership with regard to what SACTU was and its affiliations in South Africa.
No, insofar as that went, but depending on certain things, I mean, I remember when I would bring up certain issues that, not even on this, vis-a-vis the federal regulator, the CRTC, the TWU was much more activist and interventionist, and I would like to think thanks largely to me, than the CWC was. And there was this desire on the part of the CWC not to offend the powers that be, the higher ups in Bell. And that always seemed absurd to me. I mean, even in terms of business unionism, you want to pin down the boss to the extent that you can. And in this sector, you have a federal regulator. So you want to explore the possibilities, you know. And the issue that I found really resonated with the rank and file members and with the public was quality of service. And I mean, I think it's analogous in every single union I've ever encountered. And this is one that I think of the major shortcomings of trade unionism in general, is that I think that there's a natural alliance between the workers and their customers vis-a-vis the managers and the employers. The managers and employers want to scrimp and scrape and cut costs and hem things in and deliver at the bottom line. The workers want to do a good job and want to satisfy people. They want to feel good when they go home at the end of the day, that they haven't screwed people and stuff like that. I still find that true today. I'm enraged with the TELUS phone company here. They have every managerial manipulation and scheme possible, but when I phone a serve rep, they invariably do their damnedest to help me. And this isn't in a trade union context. And I always thought that the union should build on that and encourage the rank and file to do this, to play a role, to organize such a role. Then in a couple of the interventions we did at the CRTC, we actually put together our own quality of service monitoring to demonstrate how the phone company was cutting and scrimping and violating the regulations. And I think that there's endless possibilities and potential on that. And whenever we would do that, the CWC, oh, no. But I mean, it wasn't universally embraced. That approach wasn't universally embraced. Some people, that, you know, the whole old line about don't bite the hand that feeds you and all that crap. But I always thought that was ridiculous. I mean, I guess I never, coming from my family background and all that, I never saw the gulf between trade unionism and social political activism. And I always tried to politicize the unionism as much as I could to overcome that, what I thought was an artificial gap. And in my maturity and with the readings I've done, realized the history of the attempt to make that separation, to make a searing off or a sealing off of politics from the unionism, bread and butter, dollars and cents, you know, hourly, stuff like this, versus politics, and which I reject. I don't have to tell you folks why that's crazy.
And that's the issue we had to face, because the ICFTU said to unions in South Africa, we support you as long as you're not involved in politics. So the fact that SAC2 people were part of the ANC by virtue of membership and life histories, family histories, the idea that they would have to break from the ANC to get money from ICFTU national unions was just absurd. So they told them to go away, and they did go away, and they never. This is a Cold War. I mean, the best of times, the worst of times. It was a great time to do this work.
I've been reading some stuff on the history of the AFL-CIO, well, it was then the AFL, and the two weren't one then yet in the American South. What a disaster. The American working class and the world working class is still paying the price of not tackling the politics of segregation through the unions. It was just, it's insane, absolutely insane. How could you expect workers in the South not to be political and to have any possibility of success? I mean, right down to the labor laws, you know, to Taft-Hartley and things like this. I mean, don't be political. What are you talking about? This is the framework in which you work. It's determined by politics. How can you not be political in it? It's nuts.
Do you recall any interference at all by CLC regional reps with your local members or with your leadership trying to dissuade them from supporting SACTU, or did they just leave you alone, figuring that it was a waste of breath on their part?
They didn't talk to me directly. No, I mean, there was a couple of guys that the head staffer at the BC Fed and I, whenever we get together, we bang heads. I mean, we just like coming from two different worlds. And so after a while, there was no point. I had explored things in my early days with him, and I got nowhere, and he didn't get anywhere with me. So if he had some dissatisfaction with what I was doing, he would try to go to the top of the house behind my back and to, rein him in. He's doing this and that and the other thing. Sometimes that they did that, sometimes they didn't. It just depended on how important it was. And I think probably what the TWU needed from the BC Fed at that time, or from the CLC at that time. If they wanted their back scratched over something particular, I would probably get my chain yanked harder than other times. I don't know.
Jane's question is important because Marianne Pollock, when we interviewed her, told us again about how the CLC tried to interfere with the Labor Council's support for SACTU. And so at that level, because the Labor Council, of course, is an affiliate of the CLC, so they could try to do things there that they wouldn't do with affiliates necessarily. So
I remember the president of the CLC, who shall go unnamed, who talked about Cup W being a cancer on the labor movement, and Marion's response being, may it metastasize. There was a time, I mean, there was a rolling series of repressive moves by the provincial government in BC in response to the militancy of the labor movement out here. And I remember being at a meeting at the BC Fed of staffers talking about, the staffers were convened to get a briefing on some of the terrible things that were coming. And I made the comment, I thought that the response that was being offered or sketched out was completely inadequate. And I made a sarcastic comment that our response would be anything up to and including a written brief if necessary. And that sarcasm, the head of the Federation went to the subsequent president of the TWU to try to get me fired over my disrespect and my insubordination. I didn't get fired, but I was warned as a result of that. I mean, I had experience in response to solidarity or as part of solidarity, when this massive wave of repression came down. I said that there's an effort should be made by the union. This is at a staff meeting at the Federation. An effort should be made by the unions to send a delegation to Britain, which was being ruled by Thatcher at that time, to spend a couple, 2-3 weeks touring the country, meeting with the rank and file, as well as the officers of the unions, to describe what was being brought down by Thatcher, and to come back with lessons to be learned from them to help us fend off what was coming down in BC, which was pretty severe. They trimmed that down to a high school essay contest for people to submit essays on the subject of what was wrong with the repression that was coming down in BC. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Again, my sense is, what are unions for? These are organizations. You need to coordinate, co-organize, communicate, learn from the experiences of others so you don't have to do the same extent of bleeding as they did in Britain. And they come up with high school essay program. contest. Oh, I was not happy.
Uh, Do you remember at all the week of action that we called for nationally, the SACTO committee would have been around March 1986. There were actions in BC at the port, postal workers refusing to handle any mail going to and from South Africa. I think, as I recall, TWU and CWC participated.
Sid, are you hearing me now?
I heard that come through, but your lips are, I mean, the lag is huge. And inconsistent. Sometimes there's just silence. Jane, I actually don't remember the 1986 Days of Action. I mean, the TW may have been involved, but I can't remember myself being involved.
You were, I remember very much that you endorsed the actions. Now, I can't say what anything happened at the workplace, but I know you endorsed the campaign.
This is another thing. I'm dealing with the ravages of age, you know, so.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
One thing along those similar lines about this disjunction between the stances that people take in public and what they actually do, I subsequently got, I think the height of my personal activism was in the fight against free trade. Yeah, and I got involved in the national organization, and I went to a number of meetings in Ottawa and stuff like that. The second round was when it was coming down, when the Liberals under Chrétien came to office, and Paul Martin and the whole coterie of these right-wingers and bankers were part of their the government that was about to be formed. And we were at what was the organization? Not, it wasn't ANC. The
Council of Canadians? That did
no,
the
Council of Canadians was a member of the umbrella organization, Action Canada Network.
Action Canada Network. Yes, yes, yes.
And we were meeting in the top of one of the hotels in Ottawa. And we're listening. You have all these activists from across the country, the most active, the most progressive elements of the unions and social organizations, the Council of Canadians and others. And we're hearing chapter and verse of what's about to come down from the Liberal government. So at the end of this, and this is an experience I've had many times in life, it's all the disasters laid out. And then people start closing up shop and we're about ready to go home. And I asked the chair's indulgence, and I said, Bob White was there and others, and from the CLC and from CAW and other major organizations. And I said, given what we've heard, the massive threat that's posed to not only organized labor, but the Canadian civil society as a whole, we are ideally situated to come up with a response, or at least initiate a response at this gathering, and to take it back across the country, because we had representatives from Newfoundland to BC, take it back to our civil society organizations, take it back to labor councils and all this, to mount a national response. If we are to take seriously the description of the disaster that's about to befall us. I finished talking and nobody said a word. Nobody challenged me. Nobody agreed with me. Nothing. Thank you very much from the chair. Bang, meeting's closed. We all go home. Nothing happened. And then we saw the cuts that started coming from Paul Martin. I mean, I was just listening on the radio this morning talking about the homelessness crisis in this country had its origin in those cuts. There used to be a massive public housing program in this country that's disappeared. And if you haven't been to Vancouver lately, to the downtown east side, you want to see what the fourth world looks like in the first world. It is so horrific the human devastation on the street there, the level, I mean, at the number of drug deaths, overdose drug deaths and stuff like this. I thought at that time we had the opportunity, we wouldn't necessarily have stopped it, but we could have hindered it. We could have slowed it significantly. Nothing happened, but it sort of brings to mind the high school essay contest. You know, like, are we serious about responding to this? Or are we here to tell each other how terrible things are going to be, and we're going to be in the vanguard of knowing how bad it's going to be? I mean, I think there was a tremendous amount of potential squandered there. I mean, and I'm not sympathetic at all to people. I had a big argument with my wife about this 2 weeks ago. She's talking about all the adversities that the trade union movement faced. I'm not one to minimize those, but I think that there was nothing of substance done to redress this. I remember hearing about globalization from the first time in 1995 from the then president of the CWC, who had just attended a major council convened by the Premier of Ontario. And they brought in all the big shots from the, what do they call it, the National Business Council or something like that. And to start saying, globalization is coming, you know, this is a force of nature. And he came out to BC subsequently, and he was still blown away by the impact of the lecture he had been given there and all the information. And he keeps telling us this thing is coming and there's nothing we can do about it. Oh, that sounds familiar. Is that like Tina? You know, is that, what are you, Thatcher Jr.? You're coming out here, you're in the trade union movement, there's nothing. What is the problem? So let's start by talking about that and see what kind of resources and possibilities we have. And subsequently, I guess it goes to 2005, which was getting toward the end of my time at the TWU. This made this quiescence, this failure to respond, made its way into the communications sector, which had been relatively well-positioned, relatively militant and progressive. And rather than coming together to come up with a common strategy against this wave of deregulation and the attacks that were coming, every union in the telecom sector zealously guarded its membership list and watched as the wave rolled across the country from east to west, and every single one of the communication unions was disciplined and I would suggest broken. In the case of the TWU, when the confrontation took place in 2005, the collective agreement, which had some amazing clauses that had been achieved through struggle over 40 years, was literally rewritten by the phone company. Here's your new contract, sign, and that was it. And due to the failure to plan and come up with a counter response, they signed. I mean, so I understand what the difficulties were facing the unions. But, you know, like when the last confrontation between the phone company and the TWU in 2005, in the middle of that, we found out that service rep work was being transferred electronically from BC to India and the Philippines. I implored the members of the executive, put ads in the papers. Tell the people of BC that their service is being delivered by non-union workers halfway across the world. That's not lowering their rates that they're being charged. It's not improving their service, but it's helping to undermine the status of members of their community who work as telephone workers. The executive by that time was so spooked and so disoriented, they wouldn't even go for the idea of ads in the papers to blow the whistle on this behavior. I mean, that's how, I think once you start getting the reverse momentum away from militancy, there's no stopping till you hit bottom. And they hit bottom. They literally had their contract rewritten from soup to nuts. Here, that's it. I think there's some painful lessons to be learned from that. And it all goes back, I think, to some fundamental principles that I learned as a kid from my folks.
You know, as we scan across that history, we've all four of us have been retired now for quite a few years. And I guess my perception is that the labor movement is not nearly as engaged on international issues today as it was in the period of time we're talking about. And you can measure that in many ways. I mean, the union that I retired from, Unifor, then CAW, you don't see their name on all the drives that are happening with other organizations, civil society. We used to sign on to everything and try to be involved as much as we could.
Right.
I don't see that now. I look at what's happening politically, and I don't see the long list of unions engaged in even supporting rhetorically. And I don't see, and Sid, I know you and I have been trying to figure out how to do work around Palestine. And that's another big gap that is so obvious to me. And there's many other issues that they could take on. So,
unfortunately, Ken, I don't think that the criticism that you are accurately levying there is confined to international stuff. I think that organized labor is doing a terrible job domestically. I don't think they know how to organize. Very rudimentary stuff. They don't know how to reach out to community, to be an ally, rather than they bring in an organizer. It's like the NDP during an election campaign. They bring in an outsider and they drop them and you'll take orders. Yeah. Hello? No. So what's happening? Look at this Starbucks wave that's organizing across the states. They're doing it by themselves. They're not doing it through the existing unions. It's amazing. It's like the whole effort has to be begun anew from the ground. So, I mean, if that's what it takes, that's what it'll take. Okay. I mean, for some reason, these kids don't like to have this precarious existence at starvation wages. Go figure, you know. And they're not going to wait for the AFL-CIO to save them. Thank God.
you remind me of a question I wanted to ask you. Have you read John Jensen's book, No Compromise?
No.
You know John Jensen from Terrace?
No.
Well, he was the lefty up in the Northwest, from Denmark originally. He was a legend in the areas of the Northwest Community College and the Carpenters Union.
Huh.
I would assume you would have known it. Anyway, before he died, he wrote memoirs, 2 and 3 page chapters. It's just a fascinating book of what he had done coming as an immigrant and labor council work and
No Compromise.
No Compromise. John Jensen.
Can anybody
Jensen.
hear me at all?
Jensen.
I heard that.
You got to get it.
I heard that, Doug, but that's all I heard.
Well, since Doug can't do his proper role here, Jane, how should we?
I don't have any more questions, although we could go on all afternoon talking about what's going on, but it's probably best that we wrap it up, and thank you for participating, because what we're trying to do with all of these oral histories is pull together a sense of the breadth of support, not only geographically, but through a range of different unions and at different levels. We've interviewed the Sam Gindens, but we're also interviewing, people who were much more also at the rank and file level. So yours is the first that we've done within the telecommunications sector. So it's really important that this history get recorded. So thanks very much, Sid, for all the work you did back then and all the work that you continue to do now. Much
We
appreciated.
want to thank you for that daily barrage of great articles you put out, and I hope
I have to tell you something, and this is, I retired in 2009, but before that, I got involved in organizing, creating Independent Jewish Voices Canada to finally try to break into or limit or constrain the power of Israel and Zionist organizations in this country. I wouldn't pretend that we've had any kind of the level of success that's needed on this. But I've been telling people, I've been reflecting on this. I've been an activist all my life, and I've had greater success with greater consistency and harmony and focus among the people involved in IJV than any other effort I've made in my life. And I'm trying to figure this out, how and why it is. There's no sectarianism, no backbiting, no doubting. People come up with an idea, they'll get support or they'll get positive, constructive criticism, and then people will weigh in and do it. And I wanted to reach out to Ken to bring him in to help us get a labor committee of IJV going, because that's been one of our gaps, is the ability to get organized labor involved. Nobody objected, and there's no red baiting. They're like, oh, was he with that Saco guy or anything? No, I mean, people wanted him there because he had had that experience. And so I really feel great about this personally, but I'm frustrated at the same time, because I'd love to be able to generalize this. And I think back on my time at the TWU, if I could have done what I've been doing in IJV at the TWU, I could have had a hell of a bigger impact there in organized labor too, but that's the way the world spins, you know.
Well, I think we all share that frustration, because it just isn't the organizational strength in the union movement that was there when we did this work. Nobody's organizing, as you have said. And I so much appreciate you're trying to bring this Act II experience into the Palestine question. And I will do whatever I can to help those of us who did this Act II work get more involved in one way or another. You know, this is our project right now, but individually people can do things that we aren't doing. We should be doing it. And I want to thank you for bringing us into that.
Well, I feel like there is a richness of experience and links and stuff that exist and can be made. And that's what it's about. I mean, the expression labor movement is one that I stopped using many years ago, because I haven't seen any movement in labor. It's labor bureaucracy. But our task is to create a social/socialist movement and integrate everybody to I don't need to tell any of you about the plight the world is facing, and God knows so many ways and so many in such depth. But my complaint, my problem, and my desire is to get people to start to address these things. And I think what's prevalent in the success of the powers that be, the red baiters and the bureaucrats and all that, is just to stop, to get you isolated, to think, oh, there is no alternative, or if it's overwhelming, or I don't want to know about that. I want to start on a rudimentary level. What is our difficulty? What is the problem we're facing? How can we begin the process of putting together? We had 8 people in IJV in 2008. We've got over 1,000 members now. And the bastards in the Zionist organizations are having to deal with us. And so I'm thinking there's all kinds of possibilities that it's up to us to tap and to create.
So thank you so much, Sid. It's great to see you again. And Doug, I'm sorry you couldn't participate more.
We're going to have to come up with a better medium, Doug.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thanks, folks. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Sid.